Okay, so Ms. Barbara, could you please say your name and the organization that you work for and your title?
Sure. My name is Barbara Major. I am Vice President of CUE, which is Citizens United for Economic Equity.
Great. And do you consent to being interviewed on video today?
I absolutely consent to being
Great.
interviewed on it.
Thank you so much. So can you talk a little bit about the mission of your organization and how you kind of establish the goals for what the kind of work that you do?
Yeah. The mission of our organization is to invest in the communities and individuals who've been marginalized by traditional investment firms like banks or credit unions or any of that. After Katrina, one of the things that we realized is that, particularly in the African American community, many of the folk who had businesses had used their personal residence as collateral, and say in losing the businesses, they were also going to lose their homes, which meant that there would be even a greater impact on the loss of black wealth in New Orleans. So, and as we looked at how contracts were being given out, we realized that small business, and particularly African American businesses, were really being left out. One, because they did not have the capacity or the resources to, even come toward um, being in competition with other businesses that were getting work, and a lot of the work were going to folk outside of the city of New Orleans. So we called a bunch of folk who had businesses, African American community folk who had businesses, and the folk who were resources, small businesses like um, Phyllis Cassidy's organization, which is Good Work Networks, who invested in little bitty businesses, but most of those were from our community. Called the meeting at my house in Houston, where I was staying at the time, to discuss what could we do to mitigate what we saw as a total divestment, continued divestments from the African American business community. And we started this organization. We were committed $25 million by the mayor, because I had already actually, along with Bill Russell, gone to, initially it was Ron Chisholm, gone to Boston, because friends of mine from the Haymarket Foundation had said, what does New Orleans need immediately after Katrina? I said, one, an investment in the African American community in terms of economic development. And the other one was centers around where our folk were, so that they could stay connected. And we met with, then I was called back because there was quite a bit of interest in this whole economic development. And it was interesting because what they said is, folk who were at that meeting, they had called funders or whatever, and they said everybody that they had talked to previously about what New Orleans needed was only money for services, and no one had mentioned economic development in marginalized communities, which was really, and I think that just talks about where our heads had been and where our heads were continuing to be. So Q was sort of set up to both to integrate services, human development capacity building with economic development capacity, because we had been on either side, social justice and economic development. When you really have to look at both, because you can't have one without the other in a real sense. So we looked at how do we equitably rebuild communities and not recreate what we already had, because every program that was set up in response to Katrina was rebuilding what we had had previously, the inequities that existed in our society.
That's great. Thank you. And I guess what are some of the obstacles that you have faced in this kind of organizing and bringing up economic development and redressing some of these historic inequities? Can you talk about some of the challenges?
Yeah, the challenge is always resources, but not just resources. I've learned a lot, because economic development was not my field, and I both learned and was reminded. In my community, we were basically a cash and carry kind of community when it came to business. So having our people have all the necessary paperwork and stuff that they needed was very, very difficult. Um, the other thing is resources. The way that the programs were set up initially is that it only allowed for folk who had to continue to have. There was nothing for to start new businesses, which is, I think it was a great opportunity for marginalized communities to begin to start businesses in their own community, and with some assistance, of course, and guidance, that possibility really was there, but it was no funding for it. Um, the other thing that I think is an obstacle, it's even with buying a house. What pisses me off is the fact that if you had a house before Katrina, then you should be able to access resources to redo a house now. But the thing is, your credit's got to be here. Well, hell, people were able to hold on to their house, even if their credit was bad before. They had their house, and now they're unable to do that. So the obstacles are the same as what existed before, except now it's worse because of what Katrina did. So people have to totally redo their whole lives to be able to access anything. Um, the obstacle that, and we're also an obstacle that I find in terms of organizing is that we eliminate possible allies before we consider engaging them. And that was one that I had learned a long time ago not to do. So, we reached out to folk. Not that everybody responded, but what I've said to banks is that I'm not trying to take your place, but how can this be a win-win in terms of investing in my community? And we've come up with what I think are some very creative ways, and that was because I brought on board a banker. And a banker and an activist is a strange combination, but a banker who understands what happens in our community, but also understands lending practices and what makes sense. Because the reality is, we've got to get that money back to reinvest it. And an activist who understands social justice and what it takes, and to bring that combination together, I think makes us very unique in the lending world. Not that he can get everything he wants or not that I can get but we think we do a really good job of being able to put money out on the street to small businesses that wouldn't have a chance, because we don't just dismiss businesses in our community. Obstacles are one, getting African American businesses to want to take a loan, because historically loans have been more oppressive than to help, and because nobody work with communities say don't borrow enough to get in trouble, borrow enough to really take you where you got to go, or don't borrow at all. So to really have somebody to talk businesses through that and help them. So an obstacle is to really engage folk. Or folk just showing up thinking because you have money you can just give it out because they want a business. No, because that money has to come back so I can give it out to somebody else. And some selfishness. It interested me that one of the people that we loaned money to, we said, you got to pay this money back because we want to reinvest in the community. His response was, I don't care about everybody else. I just want to get my money. This is an African American businessman. My thing is, if I can stop you from getting any more of our money, I will. Because you demonstrated you have no sense of community, just sense of self. Because creating an economic development atmosphere where folk understand that you can access resources, but they've got to continue to regenerate, because that way we really build a community, and there will always be resources coming back. So that's kind of
Yeah,
some of the challenges.
those
Yeah,
are huge challenges.
yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about how you engage people, let them know about this money, try to build a sense of community, of shared wealth that's growing inside of this community?
Yeah, one of the things initially, we just did like in the newspaper. The state did most of the publicity and stuff, and I actually businesses that I knew existed, I called them and said, come in and try for this money. Not that everybody got it, but some people got it and were really excited about it, didn't know it was there, didn't know how to access it. So that's how we were able to do. And the reality is, I'm not going to do a lot of publicity. I don't have enough to even process. So we've just really got to look at where businesses are and sort of invite people to it, because we don't have the staff or the resource to process everybody who want money. Because people think that's a lot of money. Our next little round, we don't know what it'll be. The first round's like 10 million. I was shocked to go like, oh wow, $10 million. We got a lot. It's like in reality, no, we didn't. I mean, we did it. We invested it, and we think with very good businesses. It wasn't just African American businesses. We invested in businesses that were hit by the storm and all the surrounding parishes and Orleans. But the next round of money, we really focusing in on Orleans, because the money that we have, not we won't just do Orleans, but we're looking at 90% of our investments to be done in Orleans Parish. That's where we really want to go, and investing in communities that have received the least investment in terms of economic development. So we want to look at businesses who are willing to move in, like New Orleans East or Ward 9 or Treme. So we
So
really,
historically underinvested
yeah,
areas, yeah.
that's where so we are prioritizing where we're doing our investments. So it's not like anybody can come in, and I got this, because we are not as tied to state rules, and we have rules and regulations in terms of accounting principles and what we have to do legally, but we're not as tied to state rules to say no, we want to invest in these particular communities because nobody else has, and to partner with banks, and we've been able to partner so far with two banks.